Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to tell you about this season's sponsors, Starboard, a brand that's been a huge support to us and a brand at the forefront of SUP racing for over 2 decades. If you watched any major races, you'll have seen their boards cutting through the field with their innovative designs and the distinctive colour of the board's nose. What sets Starboard apart is how seriously they've always taken racing. Their race boards aren't just fast, they're designed to be stable enough for newer racers to build confidence while still being competitive. Starboard work closely with world-class athletes to dial in their innovative designs, but they also understand that most of us are still learning and finding our racing legs. Plus, they're committed to sustainable manufacturing practices, which lines up with how most of us feel about protecting the waters we love to paddle. Their race boards and paddle collection has options for every level, and their website has detailed guidance which will help you find the right match for your experience and your racing goals. So if you're thinking about getting into racing or looking to step up your game, check out the Starboard website or just go along and check out the range at your local Starboard stockist, and all links to Starboard are in the show notes. Welcome to the SUPfm Podcast, and we are now into the 10th year of this show, and we're celebrating that milestone with you and with another great season of special guests and episodes to inspire you on and off the water. This is the third and the final part of 3 special episodes where we are diving into the world of SUP racing for beginner or for newer racers. And so if you've ever wondered whether it's for you, then this is the perfect place to find out. Achieving a good level of physical preparation for SUP is a good idea, whether it's for a race or whether it's for an adventure. And it's always a step-by-step process, starting by building your firm foundations ahead of moving on. So whatever your level, I'd still recommend that you have a good listen to our previous episode, even if it's just to remind you about why targeted training is so important. In this final episode of the 3, we focus on competing at an intermediate level, which is particularly aimed at you if this is not your first rodeo and if you're taking your racing or adventure paddling a little more seriously. And building on the foundations in the previous episode, we go to a deeper cut of wisdom and advice from Paddle Monster's legendary SUP coach, Olympian Larry Cain, for racers who are looking to build endurance, strength and technique. If you do get some value from this episode, then after you've subscribed to the podcast and of course listened to the episode, then please go over to Paddle Monster, link in the show notes, to benefit from the huge amount of useful content which that organisation, which includes Larry, gives, and maybe you can sign up for some coaching while you're there. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Larry, welcome back to the SUPfm Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get into the practical parts of racing, it would be wrong of me not to ask you about your Olympic experiences. You competed in 3 Olympics at LA, Seoul and Barcelona. And in LA, you got a gold and silver medal in C1. So for those of our listeners who don't know what C1 is, could you just explain that format of racing?
Sure. So C1 is racing canoe, and actually the C doesn't mean canoe; it means Canadian. So the medals I won, they on the edge of the medal it will say Canadian singles 500 meters. So that's pretty cool. It's the only Olympic event, to my knowledge, that is actually named after a country. So essentially, a C1 racing canoe is a longer version of a 14-foot paddleboard that's skinnier, and it is a dugout, obviously, because it's a canoe, and you paddle it kneeling down instead of standing up, and you only paddle on one side because you're kneeling on your paddling side knee with your other foot in front of you, so they call that a high kneel position, and you use your paddle to steer, and you go in a straight line over. When I raced, it was over 500 meters or 1,000 meters. More recently, it's been over 1,000 meters and 200 meters. And there's talk of making all the races 500 meters. So I don't know where they're going with it at the Olympic level. But it's a sprint race, akin to what we see at the ICF Worlds, where, you know, we're doing the 200-meter race on the canoe kayak course or the 100-meter race on the canoe kayak course. And if you watch somebody like Andre Creator, who is the fastest man in the world on a paddleboard at the moment, race 200 meters or 100 meters, what you are seeing is essentially C1 standing up with this technique. And no surprise, I mean, he's the fastest guy in the world sprinting on a paddleboard, and he was a world champion in 200 meters in C1 as well. So, it shows you the crossover between the events.
Absolutely. And as you see that, you can see the affinity with SUP, because as you say, you're kneeling, you're digging in with that one paddle, and you're controlling your direction and your tracking and so on, just with that single paddle. So there's a lot of commonality, isn't there, I guess?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a single blade paddle sport as opposed to kayak, which is, sit down with a double blade. There's not a big difference between the high kneel position and standing up. It's a very natural thing to be in a canoe and actually stand up into like basically a split stance SUP position or a surf stance SUP position. And you see so many of the top athletes standing in that staggered stance now. It's very, very similar biomechanically to a canoe. And only we're doing it on both sides. And the craft is a little bit slower. And it's a lot more fun because you can take it out into the waves and enjoy waters that you could never paddle in a racing canoe.
Looking back at your time as a competitor and across your Olympic experience, what were your highlights? I mean, I'm guessing standing at the top of the podium ranks pretty highly.
For sure. I mean, the Olympics is the culminating event for an athlete in that sport, and so being able to stand on the top of the podium was absolutely a highlight, a thrill. But I watched the Olympics last summer when they were in Paris, and I realized as I was watching it that my Olympic experience ran the whole gamut. So I could watch and I could I identify and empathize with athletes who put it all together and stood at the top of the podium, with athletes that had a near miss because I came fourth in 1988, and with athletes who didn't live up to expectations because in 1992 in Barcelona, I raced doubles, and my partner and I didn't work together as well there as we had previously or we did after, and we ended up seventh. And so, my experience sort of ran the whole gamut, and I think that is actually a good thing. Like it's a cool thing to reflect back on now, because life is about experiences. It isn't just about winning. Winning's a preferential experience, but there's more to it than that. And I think the other thing that was amazing about my career in canoe was the opportunity to travel and to race in different countries, to race, behind the Iron Curtain, to race in, like one of my best races ever was in Brandenburg in East Germany. I won the 1,000 meters, was third in the 500, which meant I had to paddle through 2 Russians, 2 Hungarians, 2 Bulgarians, 2 Czechs, 2 Poles, 2 Romanians, and 7 or 8 East Germans to win. And, that was a privilege to be able to race there, to be able to perform well. But also just, to see the world as it was at that time, right? It's things are different now. And, but, I got an appreciation for things beyond just paddling that I carry with me to this day and impact in many ways my worldview and the way I view other people. And, so sport is about experiences. It's not just about, winning and losing.
Although getting that result against all of those Eastern Europeans is pretty special, bearing in mind how much state support and other support they got over the year.
Absolutely. I mean, it was, we always knew that when we traveled to those countries and we could see the way the system that they had behind them, we always knew that we were competing at a disadvantage, but that was something that we didn't let bother us. I mean, you can dwell on things like that and it can impact your performance in a negative way. We always, embraced it as a challenge and saw no reason why on any given day it couldn't be our moment. And often it was. So that was, I think, also a very good thing to experience and to learn.
And just bringing the conversation onto your SUP racing experience. A few years ago, I spoke to Bart de Zwart about some of your epic battles on the Chatterjack on the Tennessee River.
Right.
And there was a lot of mano-mano battles, which I think you probably came out with most of the bragging rights on. In terms of sort of SUP races, you know, that's got to have been a favourite event for you on the SUP circuit.
It was. It became one of my favorites. It wasn't initially. Remember the first time I did it, I told myself I was never going to do it again because I figure I love paddling more than just about anybody. I mean, I started when I was 11 years old, and I'm still doing it at 62. So, you know, clearly I love it. But I tend to like it for, you know, a couple of hours. And I was telling you this during the podcast you did of the race recently, right? I love it for a couple of hours. And then, you know, I'm ready to go and get on with the rest of my day. And so I, you know, as somebody who grew up racing shorter distances, like sprint basically distances, 2-minute and 4-minute races, racing for 5 hours is a long time. And I remember coming home from that race saying, okay, well, I've done it. I'm never going to do it again. And then I switched to starboard, and they thought it would be a really good idea if I went and did it with Bart.
Right.
And so I went back, and I discovered that doing it with another guy that you respected and who had a really big reputation as a distance racer, and that was where you were on the same team. So we were competing against each other, but we're also working collaboratively in that race. It was really fun. And Bart's a great guy, and I look forward to seeing him every year at Chatterjack. And so we did we raced probably 4 or 5 years in a row together. And it became a race that I really enjoyed. And I brought a lot of Canadians down to that race who are still going down every year and competing. And it's one of the great races. I also really enjoyed the Carolina Cup while it existed. It was a tremendous race, a big challenge because it was you saw everything in that race. I really enjoyed racing at Key West, largely because it was a fun race too, where the conditions changed every 20 minutes. It was a 20-mile race. But also because Key West is a really fun town. So, you know, there's lots of different races I can think of that I've enjoyed. But, you know, I think the biggest part of it is you go to these races, you see the other people in the paddling community that you enjoy. In all of the 51 years I've paddled various disciplines of paddling, I can't think of more than, you know, 1 or 2 people that I didn't really enjoy meeting and being with, you know. So we have a wonderful paddling community. It's a wonderful sport. Racing is a great challenge where you get to test yourself against other people that have put a lot of their heart and soul into their training. And the great thing is at the end, when every race is over, you sit down with the people you raced against, and you have a beer and you share stories about the race, and you look forward to seeing them at the next stop, you know. And I see that comes through loud and clear when I see the live feeds and things like that of races in Europe, the Euro Tour and things like that. Is people are really embracing that aspect of the sport, and I think that's largely why people do it.
Exactly. That culture is so important. And as I've said many times on this podcast, I'm a converted rugby player, and it's taken me quite some time to find a culture, obviously when you can't do rugby anymore, a culture that sort of echoes that. And that's why I've sort of found this as my home, really. I kind of think it's Polynesian roots stuff because they're also quite keen rugby players over there. But, it's the same inclusive culture and welcoming people into the sport. So in a previous episode, we covered the physical preparation framework for people in early stages or for first time racers. And if you haven't heard that yet, then please go back and have a listen. But in this episode, I just wanted to take it a bit further and to focus on coaching advice and training to cover either SUP racers who might have got a few race events under their belts and are thinking about committing more heavily to their training, or those who are more experienced and want to start producing better results. At this point, I just wanted to repeat something that I said previously about the value of coaching and say that in life and SUP racing, you've got two choices. You can either learn purely from your own experience, which can take a while, or you can learn from others who learned before you. And that's why coaches can help you do the right things at the right time, organize your plan, help you adapt. It's a lot more effective approach in terms of results using a coach, and it moves you on quicker. And Larry, I'm not expecting you'll disagree too much with all of that.
No, not at all. No, absolutely. 100% agree.
Okay, so we talked previously in our Focus on Beginners about the three pillars of physical training for race events. We split those down into technique, aerobic fitness, and strength and power endurance. So just to focus on technique first, this is one of these things which is a lifetime focus and something you should always be analysing and refining and being really aware of throughout your paddling experience. And as you said, particularly when you're fatigued. So could you just quickly summarise the stages of the stroke, the relative importance of those stages, and just explain, as people start to embed those foundations, what sort of nuances in blade angle and catch timing or stroke exit should they begin to refine as they develop further?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to look at the stroke in basically, really two phases. The first is the loading phase, and the second is like the unloading phase. And then I guess you could talk about the recovery, the air work. But the loading phase is, the moment the tip of the paddle is contacting the water, and you're basically entering the water and you're trying to feel every molecule possible of water loading up onto your blade, which you're then going to hold on the blade through the stroke. And once you've got the blade in the water, you don't just start to pull. You continue to load body weight onto the blade, because using body weight is a huge, important principle of paddling. And you are really trying to load on power from the center of your body, from the big muscles in the center of your body. So, primarily from your hips and your legs, which are the biggest muscles available. Your core as well is really involved in that. And so the first part of the stroke is driven largely by the hips. So you load the water on the blade, and essentially what you do is you make the blade stick into position there, right? So you can pull yourself to the paddle. And then you continue to load on to the paddle to the point where you enter with positive blade angle, and your blade angle, you want to try to sort of save your shoulder rotation, save your blade angle through that early loading phase of the stroke, so that you are doing the point of the stroke where the blade is deepest, where you are most loaded on the paddle. During that part of the stroke, the blade is at or very close to vertical. And then once you reach a point, and everyone kind of reaches this point where their top hand is usually in front of their face, their bottom hand is usually in front of their knee, or maybe just a little bit below. They're leaned over at the waist as much as they're going to get. Their hips are as far behind them as they're going to get, and their legs are as bent as they're going to get. In other words, they've loaded as much as they're going to load. They can't load anymore. And so once you get to this point, because paddling is a cyclical sport, you've got to start to think about unloading, reversing what you've just done, because you have to get your body into position for the next stroke. I should also add that in the position I've just described, your paddle is usually still a good distance in front of your feet. The blade is still, maybe slightly negative, or the shaft is slightly negative, but with the offset between blade and shaft, the blade is still pretty close to vertical. In this point, there's still clearly pulling yourself to the paddle left to do. And so now you got to think about how to, with the first part of the stroke, you were collapsing onto the paddle, your hips were driving back. Now you got to think about what you do to continue to pull yourself the rest of the way to the paddle and get yourself into position for the next stroke. So you kind of have to reverse what you were doing. You need to start to unload. If the first part was loading, now you're unloading. And that includes bringing your hips, reloading your hips forward towards the paddle, starting to come up with your head and shoulders, but that coming up from the head and shoulders shouldn't be coming from your low back. It should be coming from, imagine my elbow were my hips, right? If I'm coming up from the muscles in my low back, I'm keeping my hips stationary and I'm using the tiny muscles at the base of my low back to stand up. That's very ineffective because those muscles are made for posture, not production of power. On the other hand, if I think of driving my hips forward underneath my body, it will appear as if I've stood up straight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's much more powerful. And so you want to try to find a way to engage your muscles between your chest and your knees on the front of your body to start to finish pulling yourself to the paddle, thinking about pulling your hips towards the paddle. And as your hips start to move towards the paddle and the paddle starts to get closer to your feet because the board is moving forward, that's where you think about engaging your glutes, squeezing your butt cheeks and pushing your hips the rest of the way under your body. And you'll find as you're doing that hip motion that your legs are straightening. And so now you're also using the power in your legs in sort of almost a motion that's analogous to a section of a squat in the gym. And all of this, if you're doing it, if you execute it immediately upon finishing loading, when that blade is still close to vertical and well in front of your feet, if you start to execute these unloading movements with the blade still buried like that, you're bringing all of these big muscles into play to continue to pull yourself to the paddle and then push yourself past the paddle. And as soon as when the blade's approaching your feet and your hips are snapping, reloading forward, and your legs are finishing their straightening back to their original degree of bend, that's your cue to pop the blade out of the water. And you'll see that people who do this really well, their board is accelerating off the back of the stroke. And you can see that acceleration because the nose of a board always climbs as it accelerates. So you'll see that nose climbing right off the exit of the stroke. And you'll also know that they did it well because as soon as the blade pops out of the water, their body is forward. They've got their ankle flexion. Their hips are forward and their body essentially is in the position it needs to be for the next setup. All I've got to do is extend their arms and rotate their shoulders and they're there. So really, when we're paddling well, at a more advanced level, as we're finishing one stroke, we're paddling right into position immediately for the next stroke. And all we've got to do is rotate our shoulders a bit and extend our arms, and we're there for the next stroke, which makes our recovery very quick and ensures that we're in that position that we talked a lot about when we're talking about beginners of ankle flexion, hips forward, body weight forward, so that body weight's getting on the blade immediately as your blade is entering the water.
You mentioned as well as part of that session about video recording sessions, being able to see what your form is like and obviously passing that over to coaches who can manage that form. Just talk a little bit about analysis of form and how useful that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's video is an incredibly useful tool. And in this day and age, everyone has access to video on their phones. When I was paddling canoe, this was like a quarter of a century before cell phones. We were really the opportunities we had to get video and learn from what we saw in cooperation with a coach were really limited. And now, you can get somebody to take a quick video of you paddling by every day if you want. And then you can look at it and assess it. And you can look at it in slow motion. You can make it bigger or smaller. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. It's an incredibly powerful learning tool. And it's a powerful learning tool as well in that you can find video of all of the top paddlers on social media. And so you can see what they're doing. And you can see what you're doing. And it makes a big difference. A couple of years ago, I created a series that you can find on the Paddle Monster website, and I called it Technique Errors and Their Fixes. And I broke it down by section of the stroke, the catch, the pull, and the exit. And I went through basically error by error that people commonly make in each section of the stroke. And I described how to identify it when you're looking at a video, how to identify it when you're actually paddling, when you're not looking at a video, how to realize you're making that mistake. And then I talked about how to correct these errors. And, and harkening back to what we talked about in beginners, when I talk about errors, I'm not telling somebody to paddle. I'm not suggesting that if you don't paddle like Connor Baxter, you're making an error. I'm saying that you're not doing, the 6 fundamental principles of technique as well as you can. You're not using your body weight as well as you can. You're not using big muscles to the degree that you should relative to small muscles. You're not optimizing blade angle. You're pulling the paddle through the water rather than pulling yourself to the paddle, pushing yourself past it. I look at those things. And then again, I look for those 3 positions that you commonly see the top paddlers in. And are you finding those positions in the stroke? And so, the ability, the possibility is there for any paddler to video themselves, take video of one of the top paddlers, look at the 2 closely and see where they look different. If you need a resource to help you through that process, you can easily find those articles that I wrote on Paddle Monster, and they're very detailed and will greatly help somebody, do a self-assessment of their technique. But for some people, that's a lot, and that's overloading or intimidating. And so, those people, if they're really serious about improving their technique, and it is, in my opinion, the most important pillar of performance, then they should be consulting a coach, purchasing a video analysis, learning from, a video analysis where you can actually converse with a coach over Zoom, and you can look at the paddler's video together, and then there's always a prescription on how to correct errors that you and the coach see. And a good coach will be able to give you drills to do on land, drills to do on water. So not only do you end up with a clear understanding of what you aren't doing and what you should be doing, but then you end up being equipped with tools that can help you more quickly and more effectively make the necessary correction.
This episode is supported by Paddle UK, the national governing body for stand-up paddling in the UK, and the team behind one of the biggest and most exciting racing opportunities on the horizon. In 2026, the ICF Stand-Up Paddling World Cup is coming to the UK for the very first time on the sparkling waters of the English Riviera in Torbay. And it's a major moment for British SUP and a chance for international competitors to race on a world-class stage which is set against a spectacular backdrop that rivals any global venue. And if you're aiming to be there, whether you're racing for your country or for your personal best, the best time to prepare is now. The 2025 Super Festival, happening this September, will offer the perfect tune-up, elite-level conditions, coastal race formats, and a dry run at the exact venue that will be hosting the World Cup next year. So whether you SUP for fun or are competing for medals, come and join us early for a multi-day festival of SUP and get race ready on the Riviera. You can find out more about the Paddle UK Super Festival and the World Cup in 2026 by clicking the link in the show notes. I've been a fan of Oscar Propulsion well before they became a sponsor on the podcast because I felt the effect of their clever technology when I was first handed one by a friend to try. Their new Flow Force paddle is the best yet and is extremely lightweight, and while it might seem a bit counterintuitive having cuts or slits in the blade, The hydrodynamics of this have been tested scientifically. From the very first stroke, it just felt right. It eliminated any paddle flutter and really gripped the water securely. The tech is designed to reduce the impact on your body by balancing the force distribution. It makes the stroke feel lighter, but it converts more of your effort into pure forward motion, meaning less fatigue and more efficiency. It's about making your time on the water more effective, helping you spend more time paddling and reducing recovery time. This is serious, innovative and game-changing technology which really makes an immediate difference. If you're curious about technology that helps you enjoy paddling more while being kinder to your body, then head over to the Oscar Propulsion website where you can learn more and see the exciting brand new Flow Force paddles. And if you see me on the water, please ask me because I'd be very happy to lend you mine, but I do want it back. Thank you to Flowforce from Oscar Propulsion for their support for the show. Go to oscarpropulsion.com or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. So it goes back to what we talked about up top. You know, you can do it yourself, but why would you if there's that expertise there? It might even be quicker and a bit more of a flexible resource to use. I'm not sure whether this fits in this section particularly, but I just wonder whether you could speak a little bit about cadence. How can intermediate paddlers find and maintain an optimal rhythm during their longer sessions or races, or is that just time on the water?
To a large degree, it's time in the water. But the first thing to understand about cadence is, like on a bicycle, cadence really depends on the gear that one likes to paddle in. Okay, so we're all familiar with the concept of gears on a bicycle, but there's gears in paddling too. And the gear that you use is largely a result of how you use the water column. So if we consider the water that you're paddling across as being composed of molecules that are arranged in like a layer, there's just layers of water molecules, right? They're infinitesimally small. There's an infinite number almost of layers. Your paddle tip, your blade tip, goes in the water and starts to work against the water column. And immediately some of that, as it works against the water, some of those water molecules are pressed together and they'll move from an area of higher density to an area of lower density on the back of the blade. We see this when we don't bury our blade and we pull a stroke. We see all the water fill in behind the paddle blade. In order to maintain what I call connection, and that's what allows us to secure our blade in the water and pull ourselves to it, push ourselves past the blade, it really helps to use the water column. So once some of that water starts to slip off your blade, you probe the tip of your paddle blade into another layer of water that is undisturbed. And for a moment, you'll have good purchase against it because it hasn't started to move, and then some of it will slip off the blade. But if you keep using the water column, keep probing the tip of your blade deeper, and then when this corresponds, the deepest point corresponds to that point in the stroke where you've basically finished loading and are now about to unload. Now you can start to come up through the water column, and instead of the tip of your blade interacting with fresh water, it's the shoulders of the blade, right? And so the degree to which you go deeper in the water basically determines the amount of load that you're holding on the blade during your stroke, or the amount of connection you have. And just like on a bicycle, the greater the load or the heavier the gear that we're in, likely the slower the cadence is going to be. And so the more connected we are in the water, the more load that we have on our blade or are maintaining on our blade through the pull, likely the slower our cadence is going to be. So learning to paddle with a faster cadence is really developing comfort in different gears. And so part of it is learning to find really effective connection without going quite as deep, which should help you have a faster cadence, especially for a distance race. Learning to find a faster cadence for a sprint, where you want to have a lot of power as well, is learning how to really attack the water before you even enter the water. So you're basically starting your stroke in the air before you catch the water, but you're making sure that you don't pull back when you're under the water, that you're still kind of going forward into the water, loading really aggressively and still going deep because you want to be really powerful, but just learning to be much more explosive at the catch because of the momentum that you're getting at the catch, and being really emphatic about how you reload your hips forward in the exit. So you get a real burst of acceleration off the back of the stroke. And that allows you to paddle in a heavy gear with a high cadence for the short distance of a sprint, right? You can probably do that for 100 meters, 200 meters, but it's hard to do beyond that because it's like lifting heavy weights fast, right? It's hard to do. So the big part of learning to paddle with a faster cadence is learning to find more strokes without losing connection. Because if you just think about paddling with a faster cadence, you're likely to lose your connection and you're just thrashing at the water. And you will more likely than not start pulling your paddle through the water rather than securing your blade and pulling yourself past the paddle. I like to use the analogy of the Flintstones. You remember Fred and Barney at the beginning of the Flintstones when they're in the car and their feet are going brrr, and the car's not moving anywhere. They're spinning their wheels. And you want to make sure that you don't do that. So there's a bit of a learning process that goes into learning a faster cadence. It's experimenting with different gears, and it's learning by degree, week to week to week, to find a few more strokes without losing much connection. And the last thing I'll leave the viewers with is when I used to paddle canoe, we would be frozen off the water most of the winter. We would go to Florida for a spring training camp to get on the water sort of late February, early March. We'd be there for 3 or 4 weeks. We'd come home. It would be April. And we'd have about a month to get ready to go and race World Cups in Europe in May. And we would start to do some speed work. And one of the sessions we did was 10 times 1 minute, basically as hard as we could go. And we do it back and forth on a 250 meter course because 250 meters is half of a 500 and a quarter of 1,000 is a relevant distance. The objective was to go faster, was to cover more than 250 meters in that 1 minute, to go past the 250. And so you're running a sub 1 minute split for the 250. So it was very high intensity. We took a big rest, like we took a 4 times rest, 4 minute rest. And the first couple of weeks I would do it, I'd be paddling with 48, 52 strokes a minute, which is painfully slow in a sport where when I raced 500 meters, I was racing mid 70s. But the next week I'd do it, I'd be 52 to 54, 56. The next week I'd do it, I would be knocking on the door of 60 strokes a minute. And gradually, week by week by week, not just because of that workout, but because of a couple of other key speed workouts that we did, I was gradually able to relearn how to paddle faster with a faster cadence without compromising on connection. And that would allow me to be competitive at the highest level, and with the requisite cadence and a powerful stroke. So I believe that process is the same process that an intermediate paddler who's trying to take their racing to the next level has to go through. It's not just a case of taking more strokes. It's a case of taking more good strokes, or if possible, even taking more better strokes. And so connection is always in the equation when you're trying to think about cadence. The two are always linked, as they are on a bicycle, right? And because it comes down to the gear that you're in, your ability to hold water in your blade or maintain connection through the stroke. And again, this is all something that can be self-taught with enough time. It takes time. It's not something you can do in just one workout. It's a process that might occur over weeks or a month. But it's also a process that can be accelerated or done more effectively under the watchful eye of a coach.
And I think it probably does lie in that technique section. Everything comes down to technique. but it just shows from your explanation as to, I mean, you could go off and do tempo sessions and intervals and so on, but it's not quite the same as, training your cadence, because there is a skill and technique element to it, which probably needs to be pursued as a sort of separate strand other than as part of something else.
Well, I mean, I think you can work at what I've just described within the context of like an interval workout. And certainly I'm a guy that believes that in an interval workout, you should start every piece that you do really explosively. Like you should practice accelerating your board as quickly as possible. Bop, 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 and then bop, bop, bop. You settle into the traveling pace for the piece, right? If it's a level 4 piece, you're still the first 10 seconds, you're going at level 5 acceleration, and then you settle. I think that helps you learn to find that increased cadence, right? So every one of these workouts will help you. But you need to be methodical. You need to be thinking about about the gears, the connection, every time you try to take more strokes, your connection should be the limiting factor. And then as you get to the point where you're really good with your connection, you're really good with your gears, and you're still trying to find that last little bit of cadence. So this is for probably a more advanced level paddler now, where you're really trying to find that last level of cadence. Then I think what you want to do is you want to do your speed work, and you want to dance back and forth across the boundary between in control, where you're really connected and the movement feels crisp and clean and effective and controlled, and slightly out of control, where it feels like it's a bit more messy, a little bit sloppy, a little bit frantic, right? And so one piece you might err on the side of too fast and frantic, and the next piece you might say, oh, okay, that was just a little out of control. I'm going to take a step back, and you're going to find your control as close to that boundary as you can. But by dancing back and forth across that boundary over a few weeks of training, you're going to find that boundary moves, increases to the point where you have better command of your stroke. And there's a couple of other things that we can do in stand-up paddling. We can, in order to get our stroke rate higher and learn to be more explosive without losing connection, is we can paddle on a faster board. So if we're one of those fortunate people that has a couple of boards in their quiver, and you've got, you're doing most of your work on a 23-inch wide board or something, but you've got a 20-inch wide board, you can jump on the 20, and it forces you, in order to find the connection you find in your 23, it forces you to do things more quickly, right? In canoe, the other thing you can do on SUP is downwinding is really great for learning to paddle with a faster cadence with connection. And I think that's one of the reasons Connor would learn to be such a natural sprinter, is when you're on a big wave and your board has more speed than it's ever going to have in the flats, and you need to now go, bop, 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 to get to the next wave or where you want to go. If you're not going to be slowing yourself down by putting the paddle in the water, you got to be matching the speed of the board, or even working more quickly than the board's moving. And if your board's moving at 15 kilometers an hour, you're learning to paddle with a really fast cadence, to pull really dynamically, right? So that's a way that you can do it on SUP. And in canoe, I can remember one year, my coach towed me behind the motorboat, and I had to try to find the connection I felt when I wasn't being towed, going faster than I could ever go on my own, while I was being towed. And so it taught me to speed my motion up. It's like overspeed training.
Let's move on now to aerobic fitness. And we talked about that briefly in the beginner section. But I think there's a accepted, common, measurable approach to building fitness, which is working with heart rate zones. Can you just explain a bit around the background to it and how intermediate paddlers can use zone-based heart rate training to improve their capacity? Because everyone's got watches and bands and all sorts these days.
Yeah. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to, figure out what your training zones are. There's a few different ways to do that. It's all based usually on max heart rate. The simplest way is in the way that I think some of the devices calculate it, it's a safe way to do it, is, you take 220 minus your age. So I'm 62. So in theory, my max heart rate should be what? 158. I can tell you that my max heart rate is far above 158. It's like 180, right?
Not a
Still.
surprise.
What you do is, you basically like level zone 1 is very easy. It's like 60% of your maximum effort or less. Zone 2 is sort of 60 to 70%. Zone 3 is kind of 70 to 80, but I really think that the sweet spot is about 75%. It's still pretty easy and sustainable. Zone 4 is where you're kind of 80 to 90%. So that's usually like threshold above threshold. It's getting pretty intense. Zone 5 is like 90% to all out. Those are sort of the guidelines, right? And if you have a heart rate monitor, you can simply, calculate the relative percentage of your max, and it's going to give you an approximate training zone. I find a better way to calculate your training zones is with something called the heart rate reserve method. I don't want to get into how to calculate it, on something like this, because I could never explain the equations.
People can Google it.
They can Google it, right? Exactly. And virtually everybody that I coach who, says that their heart rate zones don't feel right, if I suggest that they use the heart rate reserve, they come back. Basically, that's going to make each zone a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, that feels much better. The best way to determine your training zones is to do some metabolic testing. I'm going to team up, Paddle Monster, we're going to team up with Tim Oliver and Victoria Burgess, who have the gear that we need to do this. We're going to do on-water VO2 max tests and lactate threshold testing in a training camp at the end of June. And this can start to give you really detailed information about what your training zone is based on your true max ability. But the point of being in a training zone is that you can prescribe a level of work as a coach, and the athlete can perform at that level no easier and no harder. And that's important, because if you're pulling too hard too often, you run into issues with fatigue. If you pull too hard in the easier sessions, then the intense sessions aren't as good because you're fatigued from pulling too hard in the easier sessions. You're more likely to encounter problems with overtraining or nervous system fatigue, which is a disaster. And of course, if you're training in levels that are, or you're training too easily, paddling too easily in each level, then you're not getting the benefit that you should from the workout you're doing. So with training zones, the coach can prescribe work, and the athlete can do the work exactly as intended. That's the gist of it. And, they can make sure that they're doing, in most cases, even when we're in a high intensity phase of training, I don't prescribe more than 3 hard sessions a week. And a lot of people who believe in polarized training would tell you that's too many, you should only do 2. I don't believe that, because I think if you're trying to perform in a sport at a high level, you don't conform to the same rules as the people that are just working on basic fitness. And so 3 hard, intense sessions properly spaced out during the week, I think, are important and vital if you want to be the best you can be. But they should be, between those 3 hard, intense sessions should be easier sessions, base-oriented sessions, level 2 sessions, or even, work that isn't on the water that's, like an easy level 2 run or something like that. And that allows you to do the most important high intensity sessions with the requisite quality, so that you are able to create the greatest training stimulus, so that you will get the greatest adaptations from that stimulus, and that you'll see the most gain, and maintain your aerobic base on the days when you're not going hard.
In those level 2 sessions are the ones that really sort of set the base of your fitness they set that standard, and then as you improve, as your heart rate improves with that training, the level and speed of those potentially move upwards, I guess, over time. But it's about patience and staying within that level two. That's often the battle that athletes have, because if you're wanting to push yourself and you're suddenly walking because your heart rate's got over a certain thing, that it's not a good look necessarily. It's not a good feeling if you're wanting to push yourself.
Well, I mean, again, right, it comes down to being disciplined with a training program. This is one of the virtues of having a training program. Is you have very clear objectives each time you go in the water for what you're trying to accomplish. And one of the lessons that comes from the sprint canoe kayak world is that, training at level 2 is extremely effective for building your aerobic fitness. There's adaptations that occur at the level of individual muscle fibers at level 2 that directly result in the ability of those muscles to produce more energy aerobically. Right, so their increased number of mitochondria, increased enzyme activity within the muscle fiber that is involved in the production of energy and aerobic metabolism, increased oxygen transport within the muscle fiber. These adaptations occur simply by doing level 2 work. The adaptations are greater the longer you stay in that training zone. So a 40-minute workout is better than a 30-minute workout. A 60-minute workout is better than a 40. A 90-minute workout is better than a 60. And that's why during base training, you do some longer paddles. But that's entirely different than starting to work like at threshold or working at higher intensities, where you're now starting to work at what we call aerobic power. You're trying to develop your VO2 max. That requires, it's still aerobic work, but it's right at the cusp of being anaerobic, or it's even a combination of aerobic and anaerobic. And these types of trainings you do for periods of time when the program intensifies. And the last thing I'd say is that the key to a good training program is it should be periodized. And a periodized training program is simply where the program is broken into periods with different focus. So, you work on your base for, like a 9 to 12 week period by doing largely level 2 or low level 3 work. Your body is adapting to the training stimulus applied in each training section. But as your body gets better, as you do this for a longer period of time, the adaptations begin to not be as great. Your body's becoming so used to that type of training. So that's when you change the training stimulus. And now you enter an intensification phase where you switch from doing all of the work or the preponderance of the work at level 2 or low level 3. Now you're starting to do those higher intensity workouts where you're training at threshold, you're training beyond threshold, you're doing, like very high intensity neuromuscular work. And you're providing the body with an entirely new stimulus. And so what happens there is your body starts to rapidly make adaptations to that to meet that stimulus, and your body will make considerable gains for a period of time, and then it will become used to that stimulus, and you need to shake it up again. You go back to more of a base phase, right? And so a periodized program is not simply about knowing when your race date is and tapering the work down so that you're fresh for the race. It's managing the type of training that you're doing as well as as the training load.
And as we've mentioned on numerous occasions, that's where a coach comes in order to help sort of balance that aerobic development and technique and power training to make something that's really well-rounded.
It's a lot. It's really interesting to me. Like I've had the privilege to coach 2 athletes who have been world champions, Connor and Seychelles. And both of them are entirely capable of coaching themselves. I mean, Seychelles in her own right is a really good coach. But they ask for help from a coach that they have confidence in because it's hard to coach yourself. There's always like second guessing. And I find the same thing when I'm prescribing my own, when I'm doing my own paddling. I'm like, what should I, should I really do that? Have I done enough of that type of work? When, like it's just it's hard because you're so invested in it and you sometimes second guess yourself. But having a coach that you have confidence in, that you can plan the training program with, that's the ideal way to do it, where the coach and the athlete work together as a team. Really takes that second guessing away, and it allows you to do your training with with a real firm belief in what you're doing, a really high level of confidence in what you're doing. And you can imagine when you're racing at the highest level, having that confidence in the preparation you've done is incredibly important.
Yeah, you don't want any regrets when you're standing there on the beach on the start line, do you? You just want to focus forward and crack on. So the final main pillar, physical training for racing, is power and strength endurance. And we previously discussed why that's important in racing. Do you mind just going over that importance again and why it's necessary?
Yeah, I mean, every paddle sport is a strength sport, right? We're trying to move ourselves through the water. We're loading water under a blade. We're holding it on our blade, and we're trying to pull ourselves, use that load to secure the blade in the water. We're trying to pull ourselves to the paddle and push ourselves past it. And that requires strength and power, especially to do explosively and dynamically like we need to do when we're racing. And it requires power endurance because if we're doing a distance race, we got to do it for an hour or more, right? What complicates it for stand-up paddling is that we are so far away from the water because we're standing up. That's why our paddles are longer. That our bottom hand is farther from the paddle blade and the load that's on that blade than it would be if we're in a sprint racing canoe where we're high kneeling, or certainly than it would be if we're sitting down in a kayak or an outrigger, where our hand is almost right at the blade. So with our hands so far from the blade, we're at a real leverage disadvantage. It's like using the long-handled garden spade with your hands close together. It's impossible to lift any dirt. But if you move your hand down the handle of the shovel, you can lift a lot more. It's the same thing with paddling. It's just that we only have the ability to get our hands so close to the water, right? Because we're standing up. And so we need to be strong so that we can overcome that leverage disadvantage. And the best way to develop strength is on land, ideally in a gym. And we talked about, when we were talking about beginner paddlers, about finding places to do your strength work that don't necessarily involve going to a gym, because a gym is an expense that, a lot of people maybe can't afford, or they won't get, great use out of it for the money that they have to pay. And for the novice level paddler, you can develop your strength to a pretty good level by doing, work just at home with, you can make a minimal investment in things like exercise balls and TRX straps, or you can just go to, the park and use the jungle gym and do chin-ups and pull-ups and body rows and things like that. But if you're getting to the point where you're more serious, so we're talking more about an intermediate level paddler now, or even an advanced level paddler, the more serious you get, I think the more serious you need to be about your strength training. And that's where I think a gym membership becomes more important, because you can just do so much more in a gym. And you can really differentiate between the types of strength training you're doing in a gym. Like it's much harder without, like in a gym, you can manipulate the load much more easily, right? You can load on a lot of weight and do fewer reps, or you can load on a lightweight and you can do higher reps. And when you're strength training, there's a ton of different variables that you can manipulate. It's the exercises you choose, the order of exercises, the rest between the exercises, the number of sets, the number of reps, the weight that you use, the speed of contraction. All these things, done differently can create different training outcomes. And so you just have so much more ability to really target things like power endurance, max strength. All of these things are important for a higher level paddler. You've got so much more ability to manipulate those variables to more effectively train what you're trying to train if you're in a gym than than if you're just doing your work at home. You can maintain strength. Say you're traveling for racing, you can maintain your strength really well by just doing, your push-ups and body rows and things like that, your core work. But when you're really in the off season, you're really trying to build strength. It really is useful to be a member of a gym to work on that strength.
And what sort of compound exercises, or in your view, what are the go-to compound exercises for building the explosive power needed for sprint paddling or racing? I mean, I'm a big fan of the kettlebell swing. That's not my only exercise, but that's kind of quite a good one for building those sort of big muscles that particularly use in that phase of paddling. What would be your sort of go-to exercise, I guess, to build those big areas of the body?
Well, exercises like squats and deadlifts, if done correctly and safely, they can really train your legs, your hips, all the muscles across your hips, your glutes, which you need for reloading your hips forward in a stroke. So they're big compound exercises. They're the foundation of a lot of different sports strength training programs. I think you should do a fair amount of upper body strength as well. So that's where you're looking at your bench presses, your body rows, your bench pulls, or your rowing type exercises. I like to do a lot of exercises where I'm training one arm at a time, and I'm stabilizing while I do it, because that introduces a lot of core strength. So say I'm doing a dumbbell press lying on a bench, rather than have two dumbbells and doing it, both arms at a time. I'll just take one and I'll do one arm, and I'll have to stabilize while I'm doing it. And the degree of core strength that I build while I'm doing that is tremendous. I do a lot of just push-up type work with my feet elevated, or I do things where I have to find a lot of stability while I'm doing my strength motion. I do a lot of core work. I do like circuits where I'm just doing predominantly core work, or work where I have to stabilize. I think that's important. I think circuit training is important because for the power endurance aspect of it. And if you do your circuits aggressively, there's even an aerobic component to it. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do. I think kettlebell swings are really good. As always, the exercises that like kettlebell swings, where you can be putting your back in a vulnerable position, squats, deadlift, things like that. It's worth getting some instruction in how to do these exercises properly. So when I was a canoe paddler, I never used to do squats and deadlifts. But I recognized, when I'm standing up in a SUP motion, there's relevance between those exercises and what I'm doing in SUP. And so I got the trainers at my gym to, I booked some sessions with them so that they could coach me on how to do those exercises properly. So that A, I was getting the best training benefit from doing them, and B, I was minimizing my risk of injury. So, I think a lot of what you do in a gym is pretty safe, but there's a few things, some of these big compound exercises where you're throwing pretty heavy weights around as well. They are a little bit more risky. I'm certainly not suggesting not to do them. I'm just suggesting make sure it's worth investing in some coach. We're talking about coaching. Now you're looking at somebody who can coach you in the gym to help you do those exercises properly.
And that brings us into overtraining and injury. So how can intermediate paddlers prevent overtraining when balancing those strength sessions with high volume paddling? I guess some of that comes into the plan, doesn't it? And just staying within your zones.
100% it comes down to the plan. The best way to avoid overtraining is to have an intelligent periodized training program that you're following, that you've either built yourself or more easily built with a coach. And you follow the plan, because a good plan is not only going to balance the training properly within a training week, but it's also going to provide periodic weeks of unloading, deloading, or we call them recovery weeks, where the load can be reduced by as much as 50%, sometimes even more if required. And what that does is those weeks are not so much about pushing, trying to create more and more stimulus that's going to cause more and more adaptations leading you to improve. They're more about recovering from the harder weeks that you've just completed and preparing for the next bout of hard training. They're about consolidating gains that you've already made. And you're almost certain to not run into any type of overtraining or any type of nervous system issues if you are taking recovery weeks. In canoe, we used to take them every fourth week was a recovery week. So it'd be 3 hard, 1 easy. More recently in SUP, I've been doing 2 hard for people and 1 easy, because again, SUP, the pull is a little bit harder because of the width of the board and where the load is in relation on the paddle in relation to your bottom hand. So I believe it's a bit more fatiguing. And I'd rather err on the side of caution with an athlete and see them able to do really high quality training in the hard weeks than have them do week after week after week after week of the same type of high intensity or higher load training, and then have them hit a wall. Because often when you hit that wall, it isn't just a case of going home, getting a good night's sleep, or maybe taking a day off. You might require weeks, or if the nervous system has been really beaten up, you may even require like a month, of lower load or rest before you're back to full capacity again. And an athlete just can't afford to miss that much time, right? So a properly set program can prevent that type of overloading.
Exactly. You've got to stay in the game for as long as possible, and no pain, no gain is not an option, really, if you're going to do things sensibly. Just before we reach the end, I wanted to ask you about race skills. Now, obviously, we talked a bit about technique, but there are some sort of fairly predictable bits of races which it's worth people really practicing. And I just wanted your view on, drills or effective ways of doing that. And obviously beach starts is sort of one of those key bits, which I see people at the ICFs and so on, all the top class athletes just practicing those endlessly, just getting their start right. But for more intermediate, I guess there are other sort of high risk, high reward areas like buoy turns, or boy turns as we call it in the UK. What's your view on that sort of training? And is that something intermediate should be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, I think intermediates should be working on all of the relevant board skills. So footwork is something as simple as footwork, just moving around on your board. If you paddle with a bit of a stagger to your stance, you need to be able to switch your stance depending on which side you're paddling on. That requires the comfort on the board to move around. If you downwind, chances are you're going to be walking up and down your board, right? You're on the tail of your board when you're on a wave, and to help drop onto a wave, you've got to walk forward in your board. And then that leads into, the ability to move up and down on your board leads into things like buoy turns. And so absolutely, I think it starts with just footwork and moving around on your board. And then it starts on, then it becomes practicing your buoy turns. And then it becomes practicing them at speed. Right. And it's the same thing with the beach starts. It's like, practicing hopping onto your board when it's not even moving, and then, gradually building some speed up to it. The people that we see at the ICF Worlds who are practicing them and like sprinting full speed, and boom, they're up on their board and they're paddling really fast, like instantly. I've ventured to guess that they've done thousands of beach starts. to get to that point, right? And so repetition is key and it's important. Getting to when we're talking about race skills, I just want to touch upon one thing. I don't want to let this, I don't want to forget to mention this. We talked about the pillars of performance, and we said that, for a more beginner, there's really three pillars of performance: your technique, your aerobic fitness primarily, and your strength and power. And we mentioned those same three for the more advanced, intermediate, and advanced racer. But I think that for those people, we should add a fourth pillar, and that's the mental side of things, because your ability to the mental approach you take to not even so much your training but to racing is incredibly important, and a lot of people don't do that well, and they're talented, they're fit, they're strong, but they get in their own way on race day. And if you work with a mental performance coach, and we've got Kirsty working with us now at Paddle Monster, who's really good, and a mental performance coach can help an athlete with strategies that actually troubleshoot things like distractions when you're racing, or things that can, help you cause you to lose your focus when you're racing. And they can help you. They've got tools, they've got strategies, they've got like actual things that you can practice and do to make yourself like just a stronger, mentally tougher, more bulletproof racer. And that can have a huge impact on how you deliver on race day. So I didn't want that to get away. And as you mentioned, race skills, I think part of racing and racing well is the mental approach you bring to it, the confidence that you have, the ability to focus, the ability to avoid distractions, the ability to be in the moment. And these are things that you have to train as well to become good at, so that you can do them on demand when it matters most on race day.
Absolutely, and you may well have read the next bit of my plan there, because I was going to go there absolutely and mention Kirsty, because those mental skills, and that applies at all levels. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I guess, is one of those. One that I tend to use quite a lot when I'm talking to people and coaching skills. If you're not getting wetter, you're not getting better. So it's about just sort of adapting those skills. And, when you do it's also about how you deal with failure, or as you would see it, failure during a race. Yeah. Do you use it within a learning frame and, use it to make yourself stronger next time? Never let a failure go unutilized. I think that's the phrase, but certainly Kirsty 100%. From our conversation is fantastic. I guess the flip side as well, and we sort of ran over it a bit, and something that Paddle Monster and you do particularly well is the bit around motivation, because all of those skills, all of this training happens away from the sort of glamour of competition, from the adrenaline of race. You've got to really stir yourself up to get out there and just follow the plan. And I think that's something that Paddle Monster does particularly well, that sort of motivation. So you've got all sorts of phase challenges, and there's also that social environment to help keep that connection and that motivation going. I mean, it seems like that's part of the puzzle that you've really gone after within Paddle Monster.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things I learned in canoeing was I paddled at a canoe club with like a ton of other paddlers, and they weren't all in my training group. I might have had, anywhere from depending on the year, I would have 4 to 8 guys that I trained with every day. But there were, I was in the canoe group. There was a kayak group. There was a women's kayak group. There was there was all these other groups and people out in the water, all doing this, the same type of work, trying to be the best they could be. And it's a very motivating and inspiring place to train. The reality is that, again, unless you're in Spain, it would seem that this is harder to come by in stand-up paddling. A lot of people who are, addicted to stand-up paddling are training alone every day. And so this is where trying to create a sense of community helps. Trying to um, uh, help people realize that there's people just like them all over the world doing just what they're doing, and giving them a network where they can reach out to these people and make friends with them. One of the cool things about, I really enjoyed about the ICF Worlds is that um, it brings everyone from all over the world together. And you witness it, and it happens with me too. I'm meeting people that I've only ever met, online before. And suddenly they're there and you're talking with them, but you've already established a bit of a friendship, And so I think these things help with motivation. And then certainly as well, just, having a coach helps with motivation too, because the coach, has worked hard to provide you with the tools to be better. And to some degree, you're accountable now to the coach, right? Because, the coach is going to ask you, how did it go? And if you didn't do the work, or if you didn't, it's the having somebody write a program increases the accountability. And when you're accountable, you tend to do things better. And so I think that's important. I think it also goes back to how you started paddling. In preparation for this, I knew you wanted to talk about beginners, and then I knew you wanted to talk about intermediates. And I was thinking, about my own experience as a beginner in canoeing. And I think, the most important thing was that it was fun and that I was learning. Because it had to be fun to start with, just because, to get you to go down every day. But when you start learning is fun too. You start improving it, that's fun too. And if possible, especially when you're dealing with kids, you got to try to find a way to get the sport to capture their imagination, or capture somebody's imagination, because that's where you start to realize what you could do with the sport, where you could go with the sport. And I think a lot of people, even adults, they start paddling, and the most important thing is that it's enjoyable. Because if it's enjoyable, they'll go and they'll do the work, and they'll seek out guidance so that they can learn. And when they learn, they'll enjoy it even more. But if in that process something captures their imagination as well, they're willing to go that extra distance in their training. Like that's what got me to do land drills in front of my parents' full-length mirror when I was 12 and 13 years old. It captured my imagination. I wanted to be good. And I couldn't get enough of it. And when people feel that way, they're more likely to do all the little things it takes to be good. And there's a lot of little things that you can do in any sport, but especially our sport, to be better. And those little things are, they're part of the fun, right? When you're truly enjoying what you do. So I think that's a big part of it. And that's, the philosophy we took into Paddle Monster. We try to make it a community, to make it fun. We try to provide people with information so they can learn. There's two levels of membership. There's the $10 a month where you're part of the community, and you have access to all the tools that we provide, all the videos and articles and things like that. And again, I've worked really hard to put a lot of detail and a lot of context into that information. But then the other part is you can buy up from there, and you can get like a video analysis. You can get like an 8-week video program where you work every week with the coach, or you can get the training program, and now you can start to train. But for the average paddler, doesn't join saying, I want a coach. They are joining because they want to learn and they want to have fun, and it's fun to interact with other people who are doing the same thing as you are. It's building that community. And John's been really good at building that community, and especially I'm really pleased with the new site. I think it does that really well. And then from there, oftentimes people decide that, hey, this is really fun. I really do like this. It is kind of capturing my imagination. I really do want to be better. And the next logical thing is, what? I could benefit from a coach. And so, that's, I think, kind of the process. And So that's what we're trying to do at Paddle Monster. It's trying to be like a virtual canoe club, if you will, because the canoe club where I grew up was, and still is to this day, an incredibly vibrant place. There's been, I think 7 Olympic medals won out of that club. There's numerous national championships. It's just a big family, fun collegial environment where people get together and share an experience together in an activity that they enjoy, right? And and the kids, the people that are training hard, and the coaches are working hard with them, and the kids are learning and getting better. And for a kid, that's addictive, and they keep coming back for more. And that's how we get people on Olympic teams and to the podium. And the same thing applies in stand-up paddling. It's the same type of sport. I said to Seychelles last year before the Olympics, she was feeling, I don't know, maybe a little disappointed that, there's no Olympics for stand-up paddlers. And I told her that, I said, you are absolutely no different than the athletes that you'll see competing on television.
Yeah.
That's the level that she's at, that Connor's at, that Michael Booth is at, that the top people in our sport are at. And it's just unfortunate that as of yet, they don't have the opportunity to compete at the Olympics, but they are no less worthy of, they are no less athletes than the Olympians, and they are no less worthy of having the chance to compete there. It just hasn't happened yet. But I told her, when you see somebody race at the Olympics and winning a medal, that's you at the World Championships last year. You're doing the exact same thing. That's the level that you're at. And she's like, oh, gee, well, like she hadn't really thought of it. She needed to be reminded of that. And, but that's, that's where the highest level people in our sport are at. And I think what's really cool about stand-up paddling is I can't think of another sport where somebody can go to a race, whether, was the Battle of the Paddle when it existed, or the Carolina Cup, or any one of the Euro Tour races. And you can be an athlete that is serious about training, but only is able to train because of jobs and family 3 or 4 times a week. And you can line up on the starting line beside Manu or Duna, or like Espe, or Andre Creator, or any one of the top athletes, and they're right beside you. And what other sport can essentially like a high level rec athlete compete against directly in the same event as an Olympian level athlete? I can't think of one. And that's one of the things that makes stand-up paddling so incredibly unique and amazing.
It's all about celebrating that difference, even if we're not yet at the Olympics. And I completely agree with you. The level of elite competition there is around stand-up paddleboarding, the complexity that there is within the sport. Hopefully we'll get it included in the Olympics at some point soon. But Larry, thanks so much for providing so much really actionable advice today. I'm sure it'll help a lot of people either intending to try out racing or who are already fully committed and want to move their game on a little bit. And I would encourage everyone to have a good look at Paddle Monster and to sign up. Larry will share social media and all links in our show notes, but it's been a real pleasure to speak to you, and see you on the water.
Awesome, Simon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you. I enjoyed the conversation. I'm always happy to talk paddling, as you can imagine. And so I look forward to our next conversation.
A huge thank you to Larry from Paddle Monster for joining us once again on the show, and thank you for listening all the way to the end. And if you enjoyed this episode, the best way you can support us is by telling a friend about the show. You can also help us keep the podcast afloat by visiting our sponsors, and a huge thanks to Starboard, to Oscar Propulsion, and to Paddle UK for their support for this season, and you'll find their links and details in the show notes. We'll be back in the autumn. That's the fall to all those over the pond. with the second half of this season, and in the meantime I'll be on the water, so if you see me, please come and say hello. You can keep up with what I'm up to on Instagram and Facebook at SUPfm Podcast, or you can subscribe to our newsletter over at SUPfmpodcast.com as we build to some epic events in September. Don't forget to subscribe or follow the show so that you never miss an episode. And until next time, take care, and we'll see you on the water.